And I did a course with a brilliant director called Mark Wing Davey.
Yes.
And you might have come across him. He now...
No, I read it from this.
Okay, right. So he used to be in charge. He used to run the Actor Centre, and now he's head of sort of dramatic art at a New York NYU university. And he basically taught me the technique, at which I was inspired by to make my own show. And just going back, he himself had learnt the technique from an American actress called Anna Devere Smith, who is
Their godmother?
Yeah, no, she is a American actress and academic.
Yes.
Yes.
I've read her documentary.
Right, okay. So basically Mark worked with her, and then having worked with her, did a workshop at the Actor Centre that I took part in. I, with his blessing, said I wanted to make a play using this technique, which involved recording real interviews with people that you edit, and then the way Mark taught it was that in rehearsals and also in performance, on stage, the actors wear earphones and they copy exactly what they hear with every cough, stutter and intonation. Now, Mark had learned this technique from Anna Devere Smith. However, the difference with Anna Devere Smith was that she learns the lines and only uses the earphones in rehearsals.
Yes.
Right?
Because I saw a video of her performances.
Yes,
She
exactly.
did not wear any earphones.
So, however, Mark, having worked with her, he chose to keep the earphones on during performance as well, because he felt that with the earphones on, it stopped the actors from falling into their own speech pattern. You see? So when you've got the earphones on, you're constantly being fed the lines.
So it's
you
like
don't
a reminder.
Yeah, more than a reminder, because you don't learn the lines at all. You don't know what's coming up. You're speaking behind the line.
No rehearsals?
Yes, you rehearse it because you have to understand what's being said, and some of the audio is very difficult to listen to. So you rehearse for the same amount of time that you would rehearse a normal show. However, you don't ever give the actors a script. They never see this.
So
Okay.
no memorizing.
That's right, exactly. And so they're constantly speaking just behind the line, and it stops them from maybe adding in an extra pause or veering away from the actual original delivery, okay? So that's what, and the reason Mark chose that was because he'd seen that in a couple of Anna's shows, some of the actors had been being a little bit looser and less disciplined. Anna was always very, very faithful, apparently, but in some of the ensemble shows, which is what Mark directed, he saw that some of them kind of veered away from the faithfulness of it. So I was learnt in the way that he taught. So I worked all the time, always in performance, with the earphones on. And London Road was the first show I did where actually we went away from the earphones and the lines were learnt. And that is because the play was developed through a series of workshops. The National Theatre has a studio just 5 minutes away where they sort of do a lot of kind of early development on plays. And myself and Adam, the composer, did a presentation of maybe half an hour of the scenes and songs with some actors, and to the previous artistic director of the National, Nick Heitner. And we had the spoken sections were done with the earphones on, and then the sunset songs were done learnt. And we always, Adam and I always thought that was how the show was going to be performed. And then Nick said, yeah, I really love the show, I want to do it, but you've got to lose the earphones for the spoken sections. And I was like, what? But this is how I work, and I've been working
Your
like this
trademark.
for exactly. It's my absolutely. It was a kind of like my USP.
Yes.
He said, well, I want it without the earphones. We really want it, but you've got to do it without the earphones. So I was just like, oh. So I sort of had a big dilemma and decided that maybe this was the one to try it on. And
What was his reason?
his reason was a double reason, I think. Partly aesthetic, that he didn't want to see the earphones. And partly, I think he was concerned that in case there were maybe moments where you go from the spoken sections into the sung sections, what you call the lift-off point, that maybe there might need to, maybe the actors would need to stretch it a little bit. Maybe they would need to deviate a little bit from the recorded voices. So I just think he didn't want to kind of lock it down quite so much as maybe I wanted to, which obviously made me a bit nervous. So, but Adam and I decided that the National was probably the only theatre in the country that was going to be able to pull off such a difficult piece, because they could get in all the experts and whatever, and we really wanted it to happen. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to try it with this one. Let's see what happens. And I can always go back to,
Sure.
So what we did is we had a 6-week rehearsal period where we did do the recorded delivery, working with the earphones from the audio, and then for the first 3 weeks, and then after 3 weeks the earphones came off. It was obviously all terrible, and all the actors were like, oh my god, we can't do it, because they'd seen each other doing it so brilliantly with the earphones on, because it does give as you've seen, it does give the performances a certain quality. They're slightly kind of lifted, and but anyway, so the actors just worked very, very hard to learn the lines with all the intonation and the weird kind of speaking in a way that you don't normally get on stage, because it had all the ums and the ers and the messiness and that's what I love about the technique is the kind of gorgeous weird sounds and expressions and all of that stuff that is normally kind of ironed out in a script. So that's where the recorded delivery kind of started, and London Road, I suppose, is where so far it's got to in terms of its evolution and my evolution as a writer.
So right now you not confine yourself to recorded delivery?
Well, that's
after
a good
that trial.
No, that's a good question. So this show was after London Road. But I worked on it with a director who I'd worked with before, and we'd worked with the earphones, and he really liked the earphones. And so we thought, well, he was like, yeah, let's still work with the earphones, right? And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. And funnily enough, we did, but about halfway through rehearsals, I was just like, oh, and I found them such a pain, because a lot of the audio is very, very difficult to hear. As you know, this is like, a lot of this is recorded at like a siege.
Yes, on location.
Yeah,
really record it.
exactly. So it's very noisy and all this kind of thing. And, I don't have something like, I can't always pin something on, and maybe I'm this far away and there's loads of... So the actors had to really, really struggle. Yeah, and it might have slightly taken away from their joy of actually performing every night, because they're constantly having to, So I've since decided for future shows for the words to be learnt. So I will be going back to how we sort of did it in London Road. But it just means that I have to drill the actors a lot and be very strict with them. And I think one of the reasons they managed to do it so well in London Road is because they're all musical performers. So they naturally have a gift for a musical ear, and they just treated the spoken sections almost like the sung sections. They learnt the tune of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I want to ask, because I also read, I didn't read all of your plays, but I read Cruising, I read Girlfriend Experience. So these are all focused on a group of people instead of a particular event.
Yes.
So how did you find the drama from? Because for me, I have done several plays. Sometimes it's about an event, it's always easier when you have an event.
It is easier.
But when I do not have an event, I only want to focus on a group of people.
Yeah.
It's always a challenge for me.
It is hard.
To find the drama.
Yes.
So what's your experience?
Yes. It is harder to find what the hook is. And what I think with those other plays, what I found was I met characters, groups of characters that I really liked. So I just started spending a bit of time with them. So Cruising, for example, the lead character in that, Maureen, who's trying to find the husband, and she's the one who goes on all the dates and stuff. She had been a very small character in another play of mine called Strawberry Fields, okay? Well, that's fine, it was a very early play, and but she had actually been cut in the final performance. She just kind of, often I'll do like rough cuts and whatever, and she... However, when we did the kind of early workshop of some of the early material, she featured in it, and all the actors really loved playing her because she was a very colourful, entertaining, brilliant talker. And of course, you know that's what you need with the debate. You need people who are going to do the chatting for you, otherwise it's like trying to get blood from a stone. So when I finished the play, I went back to visit her just to tell her that I had to kind of cut her out of the play and stuff, but I told her how much, I just told her I was honest, and I said all the actors really enjoyed, you know, playing you when we did a kind of early version. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else maybe that I could focus on about you. And she said, oh, well, you know, while I'm here, let me just show you my new outfits because I'm going on these cruises. And literally 2 hours later, I had the beginnings of a... So it's about... sometimes when it's like that, it's about finding strong characters and then talking to them and seeing what resonates with you. I just thought that was interesting. I saw the potential for the story in that.
So
I
the
saw the
character needs the story.
Well, no, because sometimes you might meet a character like that and maybe she didn't have a story. But as it happened, she was embarking on a quest. As it happened, she was trying to find a replacement for her dead husband. So I could see then, oh, okay, there's a narrative to follow. It's, does she find herself a husband? She said she'd been on 44 blind dates in a year, and none of them were right, but she was going on all these dating sites. So, and this was a few years ago now when dating sites were less common, and particularly for older people as well. It was kind of like, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was going on. So partly it was about, it shone a light on an aspect of old age that I didn't know about. And also I could see that there was my plan for the storyline was I will just kind of follow her on her dating experiences and wait until she meets someone and falls in love with them. Of course, that didn't happen because you can't control real life. She doesn't meet anyone. Her best friend Margaret does, gets married, and she ends up buying a cat. You know, so it kind of... And then with the girlfriend experience, she said she read the girlfriend experience. Well, I was interested in making a piece about prostitution, and I interviewed various working sex workers, and it wasn't until I met one of the women who worked in this parlour, I came across her website on the internet, and again, she, for me, broke the stereotype in terms of character, that she was talking about doing her accounts and, you know, looking after her dead father, and it wasn't like the stereotypical either, you know, working girl that we have in our minds, I think. So again, it was sort of opening up a new light. And she told me about this parlour she worked at, and then that story really was following two narratives. One being, it just happened that when I went to the parlour, it was quite near the beginning of its inception, so you could then follow the business. Is the business going to succeed or fail? Yeah. And then also, a couple of the women were single and wanted to find love. So I thought, well, that's another potential storyline I can follow, which is it possible to find love when you're also working as a sex worker? How does that? So for me, it's about, I found these characters, they were really good and they were talking a lot, but if there was no potential for story, I have to go elsewhere. But it happened that it's when you've got character and story, then you're off. You've got to find the hook, but you don't know what the hook is until you go and talk to them. So there's loads and loads of other people that I mean, these are just the ones that the stories have taken off. There's hundreds on my shelf, hundreds of people that I've met and I thought were great, but there was no hook. So it's just died and it's just sitting on my shelf.
Yeah, so
the research is enormous.
Yes, so what we see or what I read are only maybe a tiny part of your whole research.
It's tiny, and I always think when I go and see verbatim plays, I can tell how much research they've done, because if they haven't done very much, generally it's quite boring, because they're probably just putting on stage what they've got. But actually, it's about trying to find the gold amongst kind of hours and hours and hours of boring when nothing really happens.
So what is the goal to you?
Is the drama, is things happening in the present, and is people saying extraordinary things, like you mentioned the
old lady?
The character in London Road who kind of says something quite upsetting and quite disturbing. Well, I've been following her for, interviewing her for like 2 years and I didn't know she was ever going to come out with anything like that. But obviously, all that time I'd spent with her, getting good material, and she was definitely a kind of central character, and then suddenly she felt comfortable enough to come out with that. So that's another thing. It's why you've got to put the hours in order for people to feel comfortable to say something extraordinary.
So would you always give back the transcript or the part you selected for performance to the people to read before you really you get their consensus in the very beginning?
Yes, yeah, you explain to them what you're doing. I mean, there are times when in cruising, that lady Maureen, she talked, and she kind of told me some things about somebody she'd been on a date with, and then afterwards she thought, oh, actually I don't want that to go in, and that was fine. So she, we had a conversation about it, and I didn't put it in, and then I said, oh, can I put this bit in? And you work around that. I always, and actually even what Julie said in London Road, it was probably about a year and a half before the show went on that she'd said that, and some of the actors were responding to it in the rehearsal saying, oh my god, this is so shocking, and is she going to be okay with this? And I thought, yeah, okay, I better go back and check. So I went back during rehearsals. I drove down to Ipswich with the transcript just to say, listen, I really want to put this in because I think it's a very honest thing that you say, but I'll be honest with you, it is quite shocking. It's probably the most polarized opinion in the piece. Do you remember saying it? And is it okay if I put it in? Because even if I change your name, you're still, even if because in some cases you can anonymize people, but with her, I couldn't anonymize her because she was the woman who organized the flower show. So, she had a role, people could...
even you anonymize her, people
recognize
her.
Exactly.
Yes.
And she said, no, it's absolutely fine, I totally stand by it. And, she feels it was... And I think you have to be, obviously, you've got to be very careful with moments like that. And if I'd put that right at the beginning of the play, she would have just appeared like a bigot, and you'd think, oh, what a horrible woman, blah, blah. But the fact that which I hope made it complicated and uncomfortable and a difficult moment is because I hope tried to present her as like, well, this is just, she's living on that street, she has children, she's got needles in her front garden, there's people having sex in her back garden, she's got children and grandchildren. Her opinion is obviously shaped by the fact that it's coming from a good place, even though what she said obviously was really shocking. So I think by the time, you hear that, you can see where it's coming from. And it's very easy for us where we don't necessarily live on streets like that and have to deal with that, for us to kind of go, oh, isn't that terrible she could say that? But maybe any of us would say that if we were a mother in her situation dealing with daily curb crawlers and needles in her garden, and so it's about making sure you place it in a way that then you've got a rounded character there. So I think she was very pleased with the way that it was presented, and she was presented, and she's come to see it lots of times, and she loves the play. And so it's very important to keep your interviewees, a good relationship with them, and be open and tell them how you're changing things. And so when they come and see it, they're not like, oh my God, there's music, there's singing. I had no idea. Of course, they're gonna freak out, right? So it's the trust is important.
It's very important.
It is very important.
And talking about at London Row and this Little Revolution, this tour has got an event instead of just a group of people.
Yes.
But I found that your take on this is very different from, for example, what I know about, for example, like Laramie Portrait, Nicholas Kent has also done a play on that Tottenham Road Wires called The Wires in Tricycle Theatre.
Yes.
But the way he did it was very different from you.
Yes.
He focused on the event. He in the play I read, from what I read, I learned about a chronology of the play, of the incident, and also the background and what we learned from that. But it seems that for example, in this you do not want to give me a chronological stuff on that riot, but instead you want me to look at, just like normal, you don't give me what happens to that murder. You show us the aftermath of the community like this. You show me the aftermath of the community.
Well, this is
why did you take this angle?
Because I think, no disrespect to the riots, which was a great piece of theatre, but I'm interested in all my plays, I think, is looking at these kind of events and reading about things that you can't read about in the paper or see in documentaries on TV.
BBC.
And I will try to go to an event. Also, the difference, I would say one of the main differences between the way that I work and the way that Gillian works is I will try to be quite reactionary, and so go to an event while it's happening. So, I'm at the riot.
Yes.
Whereas with a lot of other verbatim writers, they will go and do interviews retrospectively after it's happened. Yes, inevitably there are those interviews in my plays as well, but because I'm trying to look for the drama, I'm finding the drama as it's happening rather than after the event. To me, it's just there's more heat in the moment. I wouldn't have been able to write a song like "Everyone is Very, Very Nervous," because unless I'd gone down there at the time, it would be called "Everyone Was Very, Very Nervous." Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Right? And they wouldn't have been saying the same things because it would be months later, they'd be sitting at home in their living rooms, drinking their cups of tea and saying, oh yes, it was really terrible. Oh, wasn't it awful? Blah, 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 blah. But you wouldn't get the immediate, oh my God, I'm not letting my daughter out. We're getting taxis everywhere, queuing up for rape alarms.
Suspicious of everybody.
You're there. You're actually there at the time. And isn't that what, Chekhov, you want to be in the room when it's happening rather than the reported event. It's never going to be so dramatic. I mean, depends obviously how you cut it and stuff. And, Gillian and David, they do very, very, very clever things with that to make the pieces dramatic. But my take is that I will try to, follow it through from if I'm free and available, I'm like, oh, I'm going now. And then I'll get it as it's happening. It means I'm probably putting in a lot of hours. I mean, I know they're putting in a lot of hours too, and I don't...
But it resonates with you more, this presence.
It does, because it feels to me a bit more... It's where sometimes you can get some real life in it. So... Yes, it's what I learned when I made my first play, Come Out Eli, which was about a siege in Hackney, and really all my plays have been very, like that. So I went up while the siege was going on and spoke to people who were all saying, look at what's going in there. And then afterwards, yes, I did get some retrospective interviews, but what that gives you is a lovely energy between the retrospective, which is calmer and cups of tea and, more reflective, and then the more kind of like, oh God, look, there's a policeman, and you get a different kind of rhythm, and it just keeps the audience, I think, maybe a little bit more on their toes. And, the challenge is always, with all my stuff, all verbatim, a lot of it can be very sedentary. If you do interviews, even when I'm standing on the street, it's still quite they're still standing still. It's not very active. So the challenge is always to try to make it active.
Yes.
And that's why, it was wonderful to work with a director like Rufus, because visually, he's such a visual director that actually it was a wonderful pairing, because he was injecting a lot of energy into maybe some of the pieces that were more sedentary, because he'd be like, ooh, not another scene sitting on her sofa. And the staging was very dynamic, wasn't it?
The reporter and then people like crawling under with all the
tape.
The tape.
That's right, yeah. So that's, for example, that's another scene. You'd never get a scene like that if...
Even the flowers at the beginning, like people bringing in, it was just a very calm song.
Yeah. So for me, I'd rather than like being told about the tea party or the hanging basket, I'm like, oh, well, I'll go to it. Why wouldn't you? Because then you're, so that you've got to think in a slightly journalistic way. The journalists will try to be there at the event to capture it, won't they? So it's partly thinking about it as a journalist, but then when you get home and then you start compiling it, and then you're thinking about it as a dramatist, and how much can you, and I don't think of myself as a journalist at all, but just to try to explain to you.
Yes.
Do you see what
Even
I mean?
I think you are like a friend to them. Not just a journalist.
Yes, no, that's right. Yes,
friend
hopefully, a confidant. You want to be, somewhat a confidant. And it's kind of weird how people, do open up often to people who are nothing to do with them at all.
Yes.
It's easier in a way sometimes to talk to a stranger, and yeah.
And I found this, I don't know whether it's the first time that you appear in the play.
Yes, it was not the first time.
It's
No,
not the first time, but
No.
from what I read, it seems, for example, schools.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
you were
Come on,
being
Eli.
told, like being asked to like have sex and
That's
that
right.
one, right? I
Yes.
remember that play.
Yes, come out, Eli. So yes, but I didn't play myself in it, and there's a reason for that. You know, all these things. It's not like it's funny. It's like you try to kind of go, oh, is there an artistic reason for that? There wasn't really. It was just like when I made my first play, I was trying to prove to everyone that I could be an actor. So I thought, well, I'm not going to play myself because, of course, I can do myself, right? So I chose other good parts that I wanted to play, and then somebody else played me, rather now famous Miranda Hart. I don't know if you know. Do you know Miranda Hart in Hong Kong? She's a kind of comedy superstar now here. Yeah, but before she was kind of like uber famous. She was in my first show, and she played me, and then I played other characters, and that was because having Alecky in the scene again served the drama better than taking me out of it. It's always about the drama. So the fact that this, in some interviews, the drama might be between the interviewer and the interviewee.
Yes.
Right? Maybe they're trying to scare you, maybe they're trying to hit on you, maybe they're trying to intimidate you, or whatever it is. That may be where the drama lives. So by making the interviewer a character, I do that less and less now. But a lot in my early shows, and even before Come Out Eli, yeah.
What did you think about this one? What did you decide?
Oh, so
to
with
put
this,
yourself in
well,
the
this
scene
one
again?
in a very early draft. I don't know if you remember. There's a moment when at the riots. I'm trying to take a picture, and the guys come up to me and go, yeah.
And he politely asks you
Yes.
to delete the photos.
Exactly. When you hear it in the audio, you can really hear that I'm really quite scared, and it's a bit of a nasty moment. Yeah. And that was the only moment that Alecky appeared in an early draft. And I just sort of said, this could be anybody. We don't need to know it's me. This can just be any person taking photos, right? And actually I was encouraged by the artistic director at the Almeida to, well, maybe let's have more of Alecky in there, because your story of going in as a sort of middle-class onlooker into this kind of world that is not your own, there is something innately dramatic and exciting about that. And, theatre is traditionally a kind of middle-class preoccupation. So it was kind of reflecting almost the notion of the tension between the classes in the play.
So there will be more drama.
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of, it was a sort of another layer in terms of the class. There I am, kind of middle-class theatre maker, going into kind of rough Hackney, and that's kind of what the Tea Party was criticised, wasn't it? Because of the division on the street, and I'm part of that.
Yes.
So I guess I was kind of like holding my hands up and kind of going, yes, I am part of this gentrification, and maybe I'm part of the problem, but hey, I'm just going out and trying to shine a light on it and expose it. But in exposing it, I had to expose myself. So I used to dread, I was like, oh, the more I'd put in them, he'd go, yeah, more, this is great, we need more Alecky, and I'd be like, oh no. Because when I do my interviews, I accentuate maybe a side of my personality to make people feel relaxed and whatever. And it's not necessarily the side of my personality that I will present in a meeting with important people who could give me a job. Do you see what I mean? So it's so to expose that felt,
You have
revealing.
always to play a role.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yes. So it's showing that role that normally only people I interview see.
So did you get people from both sides to watch the play?
Yes, I did actually. I did.
So
And there was
what's
a bit
the
of
reaction?
tension.
Because I imagine that some of the words, it's the first time they hear some of the words from the other side.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what's their reaction?
There, a little bit of tension actually. I mean, there was this one because it's about class, and that's such a kind of British area, bone of contention. I mean, mainly very, very, very positive. There were some characters who came to see the show and they really liked it, and then there were reviews that sort of criticised them, and I felt angry about that because I can try to sort of protect the performances, but I can't protect what the reviewers write. So that kind of, that left a little bit of a sour taste in terms of that. Yeah, it's a difficult area.
So what's the project you're working on?
It hasn't really been announced, so I can't really tell you any of them.
Okay, fine.
But I'm doing a new play for the National, which I started. So just to give you an example of the time now that I take to make my plays. So I started researching this play for the National 2 years ago. 2 years ago this summer.
It's supposed to be happening.
And I still haven't finished my collecting yet. So often with documentary, and this is particularly also because it's not really about an event. It's more just about people and lives. So you have to wait for time to pass in order for things to see the exactly. When it's an event, you can make it a lot quicker. You can just so that's why it's longer. Yeah, that's why it's longer. And then I'm trying to do TV, do a TV drama as well. So yeah, I'm always trying to keep pushing the, maybe they won't work, but I don't want to keep making the same thing. So I'm working in TV, and I think with that will maybe require some dramatization within the verbatim, so leaning towards fictionalizing within the non-fiction to give it more story.
So it's more like a docudrama?
Yeah.
Instead of just pure documentary?
Yeah, well, I never really call myself documentary anyway. I would say documentary theatre, but so there's more drama. Yeah. Just because the rules of television are different to theatre. In theatre, you're in a confined space and you can't just get up and turn the channel over. You're sat there. So if the speech goes on for 5 minutes, do you know what I mean? The chances are you're not going to leave the theatre. Whereas, obviously, TV, there's so many distractions, and there's phones, and there's suppers on, and you can change the channel. So the drama's got to rattle along a lot quicker. Do you see what I mean? And verbatim by its nature, because you're not in control of it, and people take a long time to say things. You can't necessarily make things happen as quickly as you want them to. You're constantly dealing with trying to make it shorter and more concise and more concise.
But the verbatim or documentary or whatever label we're using, is still your take, right? It's still what you want to do in the future. You will keep doing this.
Yeah, I don't imagine I would ever sit down and write anything from my imagination purely, but I would like to, just keep pushing the boundaries. I don't know where it might lead.
Pushing the boundary in terms of forms,
Yes.
content.
Yeah, I mean, I work with music. That was great. I'd love to obviously do another musical, but I don't think you can't just go, I'm going to do a musical. You've got to make sure the content dictates the form and not the other way around. So yes, I'd love to do another musical if I find a subject that seems to kind of suggest it. But also just keep pushing my craft as a dramatist. And whether that means, branching into collaborating with other theatre makers who maybe are more movement based or more script writing. I just want to, and I was always taught, Mark Wing Davey, I always remember him saying, verbatim should be a broad church. It should be, at the time that I got into it, really the only verbatim that existed was at the Tricycle, and their very brilliant courtroom dramas, the testimonial plays. And my work, like you kind of, like you said, is sort of quite different to that. And I just think, why should it be limited? Why should verbatim be limited to, a courtroom or such kind of issue-based? Why not try and make a musical? Why not try and whatever that else might be? That's all I want to keep doing, really. Otherwise, I just think I don't know. You want to keep trying and failing, and maybe make new discoveries. And the reason I wanted to do London Road was because I was in Cruising. I was an actor in Cruising. And there's a moment in it, I don't know if you remember, but so Maureen's friend, Margaret and Jess, they do some ballroom dancing. And they do this lovely waltz to the Stevie Wonder song. And I was always backstage at that moment when they did the dance, the waltz. And it went on for, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And I was just thinking, this is so nice, this bit, because with verbatim there's always just so much chat, right? Talk, just to have music just for a good 5 minutes, isn't that lovely? And that's when the idea occurred to me to make a musical. So that was all the way back in 2006. Yeah, it must have been 2005 maybe. Yeah, anyway. And I'm not a fan of traditional musicals. I mean, I go to them more now, but I always used to be a bit snobby about them, be like, they're so cheesy, and now I think, it's great, but I used to be a bit like, it's not very authentic or whatever. And I just kind of thought, can I use the way that I work, which is a little bit rougher, to sit with a form that is more more polished, like music. So that was just the kind of idea that I had, and then and all these things was not really planned, but when I was going down to do the interviews for the Girlfriend Experience in the parlour, the murders started happening in Ipswich. So the women there said, you shouldn't be here, you should be in Ipswich. And I said, no, I'm following a story about you, it's your lives here, about the business and whether you find love and whatever. But the murders were so horrific, and they were kind of on the news a lot, and it was like another girl was found, another body was found. So I thought, well, I will go, and I could stay down there. My parents don't live they live a bit further on in Suffolk, so I had somewhere to stay. I thought, well, I'll go and see whether there's anything to add from what's happening in Ipswich to put into my play, The Girlfriend Experience. And when I got there, what I got was the early material of everyone's very, very nervous and people queuing up for rape alarms. And I realised, no, this is nothing to do with the girlfriend experience, but I'm getting quite fascinating material about a town going through something. I mean, I don't know what. And then the Steve Wright, who was found guilty, was arrested. And I'd only really been down there about 5 days. And I collected quite a bit of material, but that's not enough for a whole show. So I actually kind of put it on the shelf, that material. And I did send it to a director who was like, I was like, okay, yeah, no, there's nothing here really. And then it wasn't until then 6 months later when I went to do this first workshop at the studio, and I took that along just as something for us to work with, knowing that I wanted to make a musical, but I wasn't intending to necessarily use that material. Do you see what I mean? So you just never know where any of these things are gonna lead, you know? So, and then Adam was like, well, this material works well with music, and then they announced that the trial was going to be back in Ipswich. So what that meant was that the story would be back in the lives of the residents there. I think if the trial had been in London, it wouldn't have been quite so in their faces, but the fact they had to deal with the press and all of that, it meant that I potentially had an act 2, and also I discovered this flower competition, and I thought that's the side of the story that is interesting and people don't know about. And I felt that, you know, the poor story of the girls, and that had been told in the papers, and I didn't want to kind of go into that. But there was this whole other side, which actually was, which was actually kind of uplifting, and the fact this community had come together and had a kind of positive. I was drawn to that, and there was some hope in that, and there was, you know, it was ultimately a kind of bittersweet kind of tale out of the tragedy. And people wanted to tell that. They wanted to, because that's all. We also need people to kind of go, yes, we want to talk to you. Look what we've done to our gardens, because it was awful here before. So the story started to present itself to me as I was on the journey, and that's what's exciting when you're making it in the present. You don't, like, I didn't know they were going to do this charity to open the shop. I just went down there that day and they said, oh, we've got a meeting later, we've got a little action group, and we've got this website, we're raising all this money. Like, oh, okay. Suddenly the potential for story and forward narrative opens up. That's all you're sort of sniffing out for, really, is sniffing the various directions it could go in.
You have to be, as you said, a journalist.
Yes.
Sensitive as a journalist.
Sensitive as a journalist, yes. And also just to see the promise, to see the potential, to see to sense it to it and go, oh, that could potentially lead that way. Yeah.
I think, just two questions. As a dramatist, you are so committed to the power or the beauty, for example, in that.
Sorry, can I change the mic?
Yeah, sure. Oh, to here. Yeah, so is my bag still there? Yeah, my shopping bag, yes. Yeah, no, it's fine, it's there, yeah. Okay?
Yeah.
What happens is when, with verbatim, generally people tell you things kind of in in the intimacy of like a small space like this, and there's a real kind of honesty in that. And when you suddenly take that very intimate one-to-one way of chatting, and then you suddenly maintain that sense of intimacy but say that to a room of 300 people or 1,000 people, it seems to take on a kind of profound level, and it almost elevates what people have said. And I've sort of found that I sort of feel with London Road what we did by making it from the real words is we sort of gave very much everyday people a kind of dignified, it seems to elevate somehow the real words. And I couldn't make that up. I couldn't write that. You couldn't make that up. She says I've got nearly 17 and a half hanging baskets, 17. It's just ridiculous. It's just a kind of really weird, it's just the kind of the odd, the mispronunciations, there's so much tied up in why do they stutter in that line, on that line. Oh, there's a thought behind that, and there's real joy and in digging into, so why did they say it like that? What's behind that? There is just so much to kind of unpick, and it's just, I just find it joyful, and I find when the material is good, it's incredibly moving, and it can also be very, very funny. The challenge is for me, the challenge is always trying to find a story. That's the hard part, I think, is trying to find a story and to kind of stick with it. But something about the technique, something about saying it exactly as those words were said, it's just not the way normally people speak on stage. So it's rather arresting for all of its messiness. These people just feel so kind of believable and likable, and I just feel very connected with them when I see them. You feel like they're genuinely, this weird thing starts to happen, is the audience members start nodding back and shake when the actors are talking direct address, because they feel in a way that you don't get that, in the Globe, and normally an actor comes on stage and delivers a soliloquy. They talk over the top of people's heads, and it's kind of like, to be or not to be, and it's the sort of, whereas this is kind of like, I don't know what I should do. Should I do this? I don't, and it's just because they've been saying that to the interviewer, and it's that relationship with the interviewer that you then transpose and put it in a bigger space, and it just feels like a living thing, which is really exciting, I think. So I couldn't write it, so that's a good starting point for doing it. I think.
Okay, yeah, but it's very interesting. I think almost always verbatim is about the beauty. For me, it is the language that really attracts.
Yes, it is the language.
And also there's so much variety, because we train actors all sorts of exercises to try to break their own habits.
Yeah.
And now immediately you give them the recordings and they take it and because we went to Germany to interview artists who are doing documentary theatre. Obviously, they are very different from UK, and then they also have an idea of but they focus not so much on language, but they focus very much on the authenticity. Let's say, for example, they use real people. For example, if I interview someone and that person is interesting, they put them on stage, and they can speak their own words. And have you ever thought of that?
No. What, have the real people?
Yeah.
No, I never let the real people in the rehearsal room.
Or you even put them on stage. Have you ever thought of that?
No, because it's not the real people. It's not them. It's what I'm making is so many steps removed from them. And that's what I tell them. I don't say, yes, it's your words, but I'm going to edit them. They're going to be, crunched down. Then it's going to be put through actors who don't maybe look anything like you. and then it's going to be lit artificially and staged artificially by a director who maybe has never even met you. It becomes something else, and I think you hope that it might become some art. That's kind of what you're aiming for. It's not those real people. It's not a photograph. It's been processed. So it's not a documentary. It's not. I cut it, I change it, so much that it's removed. You want to hang on to a kernel of the truth, and you don't want to upset anyone or offend them or mess around with it so much that it's unrecognizable or you're changing what they, But at the same time, there's an extraordinary amount of editing that I do and shaping to make it into something hopefully compelling and dramatic. So, I always like to know it's quite different. It becomes something else.